Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. We are going to be tackling a fascinating piece of legislation today, the 1957 Civil Rights Act.
Oh, wait.
And I know you might be thinking, another Civil Rights Act, but
Right.
this one's really interesting.
Yeah.
It was both celebrated and criticized.
Yeah.
And the journey to becoming law
Mhm.
is really a fascinating story of political chess moves and just fierce opposition.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
fascinating to think about how a law that was intended to empower black voters
Right.
ended up tangled in so much compromise.
Yeah.
And it really highlights, I think, the complexities of progress.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to something as deeply rooted as civil rights
For sure.
in America.
Absolutely.
Well,
So to understand this act, we have to rewind a bit, right? So
Yeah.
set the stage for us.
okay.
What was the situation in the South like back then in the 1950s?
Well, imagine, if you will, the South in the 1950s, and they're clinging tightly to segregation,
Oh, right.
voter suppression tactics.
Yeah.
That were specifically targeting black citizens were just rampant.
Wow.
And we're not just talking about like poll taxes and things like that,
Right.
but literacy tests
Okay.
that were designed to be basically impossible to pass.
Oh, wow.
Like, think about this. There were questions like, how many bubbles are there in a bar of soap?
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
That was a question on a literacy test.
These were the kinds of questions
Oh, my gosh.
that were being asked.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, no wonder so few black citizens were able to register to vote.
Exactly. Yeah, to give you a sense of really how bad it was.
Yeah.
In Mississippi, out of 900,000 black residents,
Okay.
only 7,000 were registered to vote.
Wow.
That's less than 1%.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and this really stark reality
Yeah.
was the backdrop for President Eisenhower deciding to pursue civil rights legislation.
So Eisenhower steps in, the hero writing in to save the day.
Yeah.
Was he purely motivated by a desire for justice, or was there something else going on?
Well, like with most political situations,
Yeah.
it wasn't that simple.
Okay.
Well, there was genuine concern for civil rights within the Eisenhower administration.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a very shrewd political strategy at play.
Okay.
You see, the 1956 election was coming up,
Okay.
and the Republican Party saw an opportunity to attract black voters
Right.
who were traditionally aligned with the Democrats.
Okay. So a bit of idealism
Yeah.
mixed with pragmatism,
Right.
classic politics, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So how did the Southern Democrats, the very people that Eisenhower was trying to win over,
Right.
how did they react to this push for civil rights legislation?
Oh, they were anything but thrilled.
Okay.
They saw the proposed act as a direct attack on their power base and on the system of segregation that they had fought so hard to maintain.
Yeah.
And Senator Richard Russell of Georgia emerged as a leader of the opposition, warning that this act
Oh,
would lead to the forced integration of schools and other institutions.
wow. And wasn't there a pretty dramatic moment during the debate over this act?
Oh, there was a very dramatic moment.
Yeah.
You're talking about Senator Strom Thurmond's now infamous filibuster?
Yes. That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
A staunch segregationist saw the Civil Rights Act as a threat to the Southern way of life.
Right.
And to try to block the bill, he took to the Senate floor and spoke for a record-breaking 24 hours straight.
24 hours straight. Are you serious?
I am not kidding.
Wow, that's more than a whole season of my favorite show.
That is commitment.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So what was Eisenhower's response to all this opposition? Did he fight back?
Well, his response was surprisingly lukewarm.
Really?
He didn't publicly challenge the compromises that Congress was making to the bill,
Huh?
and he even admitted that he didn't fully understand all aspects of it.
That's a little concerning coming from the president. So the act, even before it became law, was already a product of compromise.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Not exactly the heroic tale I was expecting.
Right.
Yeah. So this brings us to the act's compromised reality.
Yeah.
What did it actually do?
Well, the final version did create a civil rights division within the Justice Department.
Okay.
So that sounds promising, right?
Yeah, it does.
Which was tasked with investigating violations of civil rights.
Okay.
They also set up a federal civil rights commission
Mm-hmm.
to kind of look into these issues more deeply.
So that sounds like at least some progress, right? Steps in the right direction.
On the surface, yes.
Okay.
But there was a catch,
Uh,
and it was a big one.
okay.
The act lacked any real teeth when it came to enforcement.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, officials who were accused of obstructing black voter registration
Right.
could still be tried by all-white juries.
Oh, so given the racial climate in the South at the time,
Exactly.
that pretty much guaranteed they'd get away with it.
Pretty much, yeah.
So it acknowledged the problem,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't really have the power to fix it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
That must have been frustrating for the folks that fought so hard to get this legislation passed.
Right. It's no surprise that the reaction from civil rights leaders was mixed.
Yeah.
Some saw it as a symbolic step forward.
Mm-hmm.
After all, it was the first federal civil rights legislation since Reconstruction,
Right.
almost a century earlier.
Wow.
But others, including Martin Luther King Jr.,
Yeah.
were far more critical, calling it a nauseating sham.
Wow. Strong words.
Yeah,
So even within the civil rights movement,
right.
there were disagreements about how impactful this act really was.
Exactly. And even the NAACP,
Right.
a leading force in the fight for civil rights, was divided.
Oh, wow.
They acknowledged the symbolic victory of having this federal involvement,
Mm-hmm.
but were deeply frustrated with how limited the act actually was.
Right.
It felt like a very hollow victory.
So we've got this act that's been watered down by political compromise, facing fierce opposition, drawing mixed reactions even from the very people it was meant to help.
Right.
Where do we go from here? How do we even begin to understand the legacy of something so complex?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And to answer, we need to look at how different historians have interpreted the 1957 Act.
Okay.
Because depending on who you ask, you'll get a very different answer.
Okay, I am intrigued.
Right.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because understanding how historians view this act can give us a whole new perspective.
Absolutely.
You ready to unpack some historical viewpoints?
Let's do it. I always enjoy looking at events like this
Yeah.
from multiple angles.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Welcome back. Let's unpack those different historical takes on the 1957 Civil Rights Act.
Okay.
It's like looking through a kaleidoscope.
Okay.
You turn it slightly,
Yeah.
and you get a whole new perspective.
Okay, so let's start with the traditional historians.
Okay.
How do they typically view the act?
Well, for them, context is key.
Whoa.
Remember, this was the first federal civil rights legislation since Reconstruction.
Right.
A huge gap.
Huge.
So they tend to focus on political mechanisms
Mm-hmm.
and the role of leaders.
Okay.
And they see the act as a vital step forward.
So they're impressed by the fact that the federal government
No.
finally stepped in after almost a century of inaction.
Exactly. It was a significant shift in the political landscape.
Yeah.
They see it as a turning point,
Okay.
setting a precedent for future legislation,
Mm-hmm.
showing that the federal government was willing to take a stand on civil rights.
But from what we've discussed, the act didn't really accomplish much in terms of actual change on the ground.
Right.
Did traditional historians just overlook those shortcomings?
It's not so much about overlooking them
Oh.
as it is about understanding the limitations of the time.
Okay.
Traditional historians often acknowledge the act's weaknesses,
Mm-hmm.
but they emphasize its importance in shifting the national conversation,
Okay.
laying the groundwork for more robust laws to come.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what about the revisionist historians?
Okay.
They're usually a bit more critical, right?
Right.
What's their take on the 1957 Act?
Revisionists are all about digging deeper,
Mm-hmm.
challenging those traditional narratives.
Yep.
They tend to focus on grassroots movements
Yeah.
and social change from the bottom up.
Yep.
And for them, the act falls short.
Okay.
They see it as a largely symbolic gesture
Right.
that didn't really address the systemic issues that black voters were facing in the South.
So they're less impressed by the federal government's involvement and more focused on the lived experiences of those who were still facing discrimination and disenfranchisement.
Precisely. They argue that the act was more about political maneuvering and appeasement
Okay.
than about a true commitment to racial equality.
Right.
They highlight the weak enforcement mechanisms
Yeah.
and Eisenhower's hesitant support as evidence of his shortcomings.
So we've got these two contrasting views. The traditionalists who see it as a positive turning point
Right.
and the revisionists who see it as a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Are there any other ways of looking at the act?
Oh, absolutely. History isn't a two-sided coin.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the continuity historians.
Okay.
They emphasize long-term historical trends.
Okay.
And for them, the 1957 Act is part of a gradual but persistent progression
Okay.
in the fight for civil rights.
So they see it as one piece in a much larger puzzle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They argue that it wasn't a sudden breakthrough or a singular failure,
Right.
but rather a building block,
Okay.
laying the foundation for the more significant and impactful civil rights legislation of the 1960s, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964
Yeah.
and the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
So it's all about understanding the long game,
Uh-huh.
recognizing that progress is often incremental,
Right.
and building upon previous efforts.
Yeah. The continuity historians help us see the 1957 Act as a link in a chain, connecting past struggles to future victories.
Yeah.
They highlight the importance of persistence
Yeah.
and the cumulative impact of even seemingly small steps forward.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
We got the traditionalists focused on the political shift, revisionists looking at the Act's practical limitations,
Right?
and the continuity historians emphasizing the long-term progression.
Uh-huh.
Are there any other lenses through which historians view this act?
There's one more group worth mentioning, the legalist historians.
Okay.
As you might guess, they are all about the law.
Okay.
They dive deep into the Act's legal intricacies,
Mm-hmm.
examining its structure,
Okay.
its impact on the judicial system,
Right.
and its precedents.
So they're less concerned with the political drama or the social implications and more interested in the nuts and bolts of the law itself.
Precisely. For them, the creation of the Civil Rights Division
Okay.
within the Justice Department is a key development.
Right.
It signifies a shift towards federal oversight of civil rights issues, setting the stage for future legal battles
Yeah.
and the enforcement of anti-discrimination laws.
So the legalists see the 1957 Act as a sort of legal blueprint,
Yeah.
shaping the landscape for future legal challenges
Uh-huh.
and advancements in civil rights law.
Exactly. They also scrutinize the Act's limitations,
Okay.
particularly that lack of robust enforcement mechanisms,
Yeah.
viewing these weaknesses as crucial lessons for future legislation. They emphasize the importance of strong legal frameworks
Right.
and the role of the judiciary
Okay.
in upholding civil rights.
Wow. It's incredible how one piece of legislation can be viewed through so many different lenses.
I know, right?
Each of these perspectives adds a new layer of understanding
Yeah.
to the 1957 Civil Rights Act.
That's the beauty of studying history, isn't it?
It is.
It's not just about memorizing dates and names.
Yeah.
It's about understanding different interpretations,
Right.
appreciating nuance, and engaging in critical thinking.
It definitely makes you realize that history is never black and white. There are always multiple perspectives,
Yeah.
each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Absolutely. And by considering these different viewpoints,
Yeah.
we can gain a more holistic and nuanced understanding of the past, which ultimately helps us navigate the present
Yeah.
and shape the future.
So after hearing all these different historical interpretations, where do you land?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think there's one definitive answer.
Okay.
I find value in all of these perspectives.
Okay.
The traditionalists remind us of the importance of political leadership and bold action.
Okay.
The revisionists challenge us to consider the lived experiences
Yeah.
of those most affected by injustice.
Right.
The continuity historians underscore the long-term nature of progress and the cumulative impact of our efforts.
Right.
And the legalists highlight the significance of strong legal frameworks and judicial oversight in protecting civil rights.
So you're saying we need to take a multifaceted approach to understanding history?
Yes.
Drawing on insights from various perspectives
Yeah.
to form a more complete picture.
Exactly. It's like assembling a jigsaw puzzle.
Okay.
Each piece, even the seemingly insignificant ones,
Yeah.
contributes to the overall image.
Right.
And by appreciating the complexity and nuance of historical events, we can avoid simplistic narratives
Right.
and gain a deeper, richer understanding.
This has been an incredibly insightful discussion.
Well, thank you.
You've really opened my eyes to the different ways historians interpret the 1957 Civil Rights Act.
Good, good.
And you've made me think about how these different interpretations can shape our understanding of the civil rights movement as a whole.
Right.
But before we wrap up, I have one final question for you.
Okay.
Knowing how the 1957 Act played out with all its compromises and limitations,
Right.
how do you think future civil rights legislation could be crafted to be more effective? What lessons can we learn from this historical example?
Yeah, that's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
Like, knowing what we know now,
Right.
how can we make sure that future attempts to address inequality are more successful? What are the key ingredients for meaningful and lasting change?
Well, it's a question that legal scholars and policymakers and activists grapple with constantly.
Yeah.
And the 1957 Act offers some valuable insights.
Okay.
First and foremost, it highlights the absolute necessity of strong enforcement mechanisms.
Okay.
It's not enough to just declare that discrimination is wrong.
Right.
You need a way to make sure that those declarations have teeth.
So you're saying that any law aimed at tackling these like systemic issues like racism needs to have a built-in system of accountability.
Yes.
There has to be a way to hold violators responsible and provide real remedies for those who've been harmed.
Exactly. Laws without enforcement are like cars without engines.
Okay.
They look good on paper, but won't get you very far.
Right. And this is where the 1957 Act faltered.
Yeah.
Remember those all-white juries we talked about?
Yes.
That's a prime example of a weak enforcement mechanism that undermined the Act's potential impact.
Right, because in a system where racial bias is so deeply entrenched, those juries weren't likely to hold white officials accountable for discriminating against black voters.
Exactly.
It's a painful reminder that laws, even well-intentioned ones, can be rendered ineffective if they lack the power to address the very problems they're meant to solve.
Absolutely. And here's another crucial lesson from the 1957 Act.
Okay.
You can't legislate away deep-rooted social and economic inequalities.
Right.
Laws can create frameworks for change, but they can't single-handedly solve problems like poverty, lack of access to quality education, or healthcare disparities.
So you're saying it's not enough to just focus on legal equality. We have to address the underlying conditions that create and perpetuate inequality in the first place.
Precisely. It's about creating a society where everyone has a genuine opportunity to thrive, regardless of their background or the color of their skin. And that requires a multifaceted approach, tackling issues like economic injustice, educational disparities, and healthcare inequities, alongside legal reforms.
It's a reminder that lasting change requires more than just words on paper. It demands a commitment to addressing the root causes of inequality and creating a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Absolutely. And here's one more crucial point to consider.
Okay.
Even with the best intentions, legislation can sometimes have unintended consequences.
Oh, interesting.
So it's important to carefully consider all potential outcomes and to be prepared to adapt and adjust as needed.
So it's about being thoughtful and strategic, but also flexible and responsive. It's about recognizing that social change is a process, not a destination. And that we need to be willing to learn and adjust along the way.
Exactly. The 1957 Act, despite its limitations, ultimately contributed to the advancement of civil rights. It may not have achieved everything its proponents hoped for, but it shifted the conversation, created new legal tools, and set the stage for future progress.
It's a reminder that even seemingly small steps can have a ripple effect, and that the fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint.
And perhaps most importantly, we need to make sure that those who have been marginalized and impacted by inequality are at the forefront of this fight. Their voices and lived experiences must guide our efforts to create a truly just and equitable society.
It's about amplifying the voices of those who've been silenced. And ensuring that their perspectives shape the solutions that we create.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that those closest to the problem are often closest to the solutions as well.
For sure.
Their insights are invaluable in crafting legislation that is both effective and meaningful.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the 1957 Civil Rights Act.
Well, thank you.
We've explored its historical context, its political complexities, its mixed legacy, and the different ways that historians have interpreted its significance.
You did a good one.
And we've also touched on the broader lessons we can learn from this historical example. Lessons about the importance of strong enforcement, addressing root causes, and centering the voices of those most affected by injustice.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
You've given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners will walk away from this deep dive with a much deeper understanding of this pivotal moment in history. And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring the history of the civil rights movement, is rich and multifaceted.
Absolutely.
It's a story of courage and resilience and the ongoing struggle for equality.
It is, remember?
History is not just something we learn about.
Right.
It's something we actively create.
Yeah.
By engaging with the past, questioning assumptions, and seeking out diverse perspectives, we can help shape a more just and equitable future for everyone.
I agree.
That's a powerful message to end on.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time for another exploration of history's hidden depths.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.